You know, some stories from history, they're not really about the past at all. Think of them more like blueprints, a detailed schematic that shows us not just what happened, but why our world works the way it does, right now, today. And this is one of those stories. It's all about a problem that seemed impossible, an invention that felt like science fiction, and how it completely rewrote the rules of war. It all starts in the pitch-black, suffocating darkness of the Pacific.
Just for a second, try to put yourself in his shoes. You're Lieutenant Commander Susumu Kimura. You're a skilled pilot, a warrior for your nation. You feel like you own the night sky. The darkness isn't a threat, it's your cloak, your greatest ally. And then, it happens. A flash of light from absolutely nowhere. The sound of your canopy shattering, the shriek of metal tearing apart. You look around, frantically, there's nothing there. No plane on your tail, no enemy in front, just death coming out of the void. You realize you're not in a dogfight. You're being hunted by a phantom. His words aren't just a combat report. They're the testimony of someone who's seen a ghost, an invisible enemy that can see you perfectly when you can't see a thing. So it raises a terrifying question, doesn't it? What happens when one side suddenly masters the dark and the other is left completely blind?
To really get the answer, we have to travel back to Guadalcanal in 1942. For the U.S. Marines desperately holding on to that jungle island, the fighting didn't stop when the sun went down. Oh no, that's when the real war began. A psychological torture, a grinding assault on the mind that came like clockwork. Every single night. And this nightly nightmare had a name, a nickname the Marines gave it, Washing Machine Charlie. It usually wasn't some fearsome bomber. Often it was just one old, slow float plane. But the pilot would do something absolutely brilliant. He'd intentionally make the engines run out of sync. This created this awful, droning, pulsating sound that was just deeply unsettling. It would echo through the jungle for hours, and it wasn't the sound of an attack. It was the sound of dread itself, a noise that just crawled inside your head and made it clear that sleep was a luxury you were not going to have.
The strategy here was just genius in how cruel it was.
It wasn't really about killing people in large numbers. Sometimes they'd just drop one random bomb, just to make sure nobody relaxed. Or maybe just a flare, which would suddenly light up all the terrified faces on the ground in this ghostly glow before plunging everyone back into terrifying darkness. But mostly, they would just circle and drone for hours. The real weapon wasn't the bomb, it was exhaustion. The goal was systematic sleep deprivation, because a soldier who can't sleep can't fight. Nerves get shredded, people make deadly mistakes. An entire fighting force of thousands of men was being slowly and methodically broken down, night after night, without ever fighting a major battle. The Japanese had done more than learn to fight in the dark. They had weaponized the darkness itself. And against that weapon, the Americans had absolutely no defense.
So this became the one question that mattered. The desperate, obsessive question that was being asked in the muddy foxholes on the front lines and in the highest offices back in the Pentagon. Your soldiers are being worn down to nothing. Their morale is in the gutter. And the enemy is literally a ghost you can hear but can never ever see. What do? I mean, seriously, what can you do when every weapon you have, all your training, all your firepower is made totally useless by the simple fact that it's dark outside?
The answer when it came didn't come from a general with a new battle plan. It didn't come from anywhere you'd expect. Nope. It came from this frantic, almost bizarre partnership between high-ranking naval officers and a bunch of civilian scientists. The guys in sweaters and tweed jackets, holed up in a secret lab at MIT. They were facing a problem that the military couldn't solve, so they had to invent a solution from scratch.
And you really have to appreciate the incredible speed this happened at. This wasn't some slow, careful research project. This was a flat-out sprint against time while lives were on the line. On April 10, 1943, the message comes in from the Pacific Fleet. It's desperate. We need a night fighter solution, and we need it yesterday. A little over 6 months later, think about that, just 6 months, on Halloween night of all things, an American pilot is flying a Corsair in total blackness. He's being guided by a guy on an aircraft carrier miles away, just watching a little blip on a screen. The pilot follows the instructions, aims at nothing but darkness, pulls the trigger, and blows a Japanese bomber out of the sky that he literally never even saw. In just 194 days, a crazy idea went from a desperate request to a combat-tested reality.
So what was the magic trick? It was this piece of gear that frankly shouldn't have existed yet, the AN APS-6 radar. See, back then, radar was this huge, heavy thing. It took up entire rooms on a massive battleship.
And somehow, these scientists at MIT figured out how to shrink all of that incredible power, all that capability, down into a pod about the size of a torpedo, a pod they could just hang on the wing of a small fighter plane. All of a sudden, a single pilot, all alone in the dark, could see an enemy plane from 4 miles away and track it accurately enough to shoot it down. It wasn't just an improvement, it was like giving a blind man superpowers.
But this is where the story takes a really fascinating turn. Because, you see, having the most amazing technology in the world doesn't mean a thing if you can't get a person to actually trust it and use it. The biggest hurdle wasn't the engineering, it was human psychology. They had to take these pilots, guys trained their whole lives to trust their eyes, their gut instincts, the feel of the plane in their hands, and tell them to ignore all of it. They had to teach them to fly straight into a black abyss and bet their life on a little flickering green line on a tiny screen.
60%. That was the washout rate for pilots trying to get into this new night fighter program. Just let that number sink in. These weren't kids fresh out of flight school. These were experienced, combat-hardened pilots, and more than half of them just couldn't do it. The mental strain of taking off from a carrier deck into a moonless, starless night with no horizon, no up, no down, and having to rely completely on your instruments when every fiber of your being is screaming at you that you're about to die, it was just too much for most of them. It required a whole new kind of courage.
And this quote from one of the instructors, Lieutenant John Phillips, just lays out the cold, hard new reality perfectly. This wasn't the graceful, swirling ballet of a classic dogfight anymore. That was over. This new kind of combat was cold, it was predatory, it was brutally efficient. It was a whole new kind of math. You had to completely rewire your brain, unlearn everything that kept you alive before, and put your absolute total faith in that machine. Because in the dark, there's no room for error. There are no fancy maneuvers. There are no second chances. The pilot who trusted his screen saw first. The one who saw first shot first. And the one who shot first was the only one who came home.
So, the pilots who actually made it through this incredibly difficult training, well, they were a whole new breed of aviator. They were the first true masters of technological warfare. And when they finally arrived in the Pacific, the entire balance of power in the night sky was about to shift, and shift in a big, violent, and permanent way. The hunted were about to become the hunters.
And here's the other piece of the puzzle. The real secret weapon wasn't just the radar itself. It was the industrial power that could build it over and over and over again. While American factories were churning out more than 2,000 of these advanced radar sets, Japan's entire war industry, starved for resources, managed to build fewer than 50. And most of those were so primitive and unreliable they were basically useless. It wasn't just a technology gap anymore, it was an industrial Grand Canyon.
And what does that industrial gap look like in combat? It looks like this number, 18-1. For every one American night fighter that was lost, they destroyed 18 enemy planes. This wasn't a fight, it was an extermination. The Japanese pilots were flying into a high-tech ambush every single time they took off. The very ghosts they had used to terrorize the Marines were now hunting them.
And this right here is how you know you've truly won. Just imagine you're a fresh Marine landing on an island in the Pacific in late 1944. You've heard all the horror stories about Washing Machine Charlie. You braced yourself for those sleepless nights, for that terrifying sound. And on your first night, you'll wait. And you hear nothing, just the jungle. And the next night, it's quiet again. The threat wasn't just defeated, it was completely erased. The psychological weapon that had once broken the will of an army was just gone. The night no longer belonged to them.
But the story doesn't end there, when the war did. Because that blueprint, the one they drew up in the middle of a desperate fight, it has a very, very long legacy. And this is the part of the story that's not about the past at all. This is about us. It's about why this fight from 80 years ago still matters to you, right now. The results of it are all around us, usually hidden in plain sight.
So think about this. The next time you're on a plane that lands perfectly safely in the middle of a rainstorm or thick fog, you can thank the direct descendants of that miniaturized radar they strapped to a fighter plane. That whole complex, invisible system of air traffic control that keeps thousands of planes from colliding every day, it evolved directly from the techniques those controllers used to guide fighters to their unseen targets. The very idea that a pilot must be able to fly on instruments alone became the gold standard for every pilot in the world, military and commercial. Even something as simple as the red light in cockpits that helps pilots keep their night vision, well, that's now used in operating rooms and by astronomers. These desperate solutions for war became the quiet foundations of our modern safety.
Which brings us right back to where we started, to that idea of a blueprint. The story of the Night Fighters is this incredible reminder that sometimes our biggest, most terrifying problems, well, they require solutions that we can't even imagine yet. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are our modern-day washing machine Charlies? What are the invisible threats, things like cyber warfare or viral misinformation, that are quietly wearing us down every day? And who is out there right now, in some lab we've never heard of, inventing the next radar? The next new way of seeing that will let us finally start fighting back against the ghosts that haunt us today, and finally own the darkness.